What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Spider-Verse. Specifically, as promised, we are covering Edge of Spider-Verse. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what that is, Edge of Spider-Verse, and we technically already covered part 1, but Edge of Spider-Verse was a 5-part miniseries that basically covered the origins of like different Spider-esque characters from across the multiverse, some of whom ended up joining the various, the great big huge Spider-Man team as part of Spider-Verse, and others who actually were killed by the Inheritors. So it's a really, really cool concept. This one in particular is the origin of Spider-Gwen. And this one's nuts because here's the crazy thing. When this story came out, it's one of those rare instances in this day and age when a character is introduced in comics and immediately explodes in popularity. It was actually the costume that made Spider-Gwen so popular when she first came out because the costume design was fantastic. But like literally that year at like Comic-Cons everywhere, like you just saw girls running around as like Spider-Gwen. It was nuts how popular she was. But what this does is it initially opens up basically at Midtown High School, right? Midtown being the school that Peter Parker went to. So a lot of similarities that we know of between this alternate reality Spider-Man story and the main Marvel Universe story. But basically, Gwen Stacy plays in a band called the Mary Janes, which my initial idea was like, man, how arrogant could you be that you named a band after yourself? But Van Halen did the same thing, and their band was amazing. The thing about this is that we get this kind of flashback, right? Now, this is her first appearance in comics. And so Jason Latour plays it fast and quick with her origin, in the sense that all we really know is that basically she was bitten by a radioactive spider and that in turn she went on to become a superhero. But unlike the main Marvel Universe where Captain Stacy, the father of Gwen, was someone that became an ally of Spider-Man, in this instance he's actually an enemy of Spider-Gwen, all the while totally unaware of the fact that his daughter is Spider-Gwen. So that added a really cool dynamic. On top of that, Peter Parker never became Spider-Man. Instead, he's just basically an introverted kid in a school that gets picked on all the time. And so Gwen Stacy is the one saving him, and in a pursuit to become something comparable to her, he actually ended up becoming the Lizard instead. And during some kind of a conflict, which is never explored here in the story, he basically ends up dying. And so following that, what you get is J. Jonah Jameson that puts forward this idea that basically Peter Parker died at the hands of Spider-Gwen and that he has to be avenged, right? That superheroes are basically being viewed as vigilantes and they can't be allowed to go around and operate in that capacity, right? So the cool thing about this is that with that little bit out of a way, she kind of gets lost in herself as she's playing in this band, right? Just kind of getting lost and sort of, getting carried away. And of course, she's told by the band, hey, let's just take a break, right? Remember, we have our concert coming up. And so you get basically this kind of big struggle that Spider-Gwen goes through. And this is one of the things that really brought a lot of people on board. Spider-Gwen was hugely popular among girls, which if I'm being honest with you guys, Marvel needed that at the time, right? Marvel didn't have a whole lot of heroes that resonated with the female audience. And so, by and large, there weren't a whole lot of people that women could have a camaraderie with. And so one of the things that a lot of just young people in general struggle with is like the coming of age thing, right? A lot of you guys who are in your teenage years and those of you guys who remember your teenage years, you remember what it was like, right? You're trying to fit in, you're trying to understand your place in the bigger picture, you're trying to figure out who you are. So you're making friendships, but you're not even sure if the friends you have are going to be your friends for the rest of your life. You want to make sure you maintain those relationships, but you also know you're changing. It's a very, very confusing and difficult time that I think is exacerbated by the nature of social media. But the thing about this is that she's basically struggling with this idea that one part of her feels guilt over the death of Peter Parker, but there's another part of her that's like, I'm not the one who's responsible for this. So while the world is telling her it's your fault Peter died, she knows it's not, but she can never really share her identity with seemingly anybody around her, let alone her father. Her father's a cop and her father's hunting Spider-Gwen. And so there's no real knowing what would happen if she dumped her identity to her father. Now, there does come a moment when she almost does, when she almost tells her dad who she is, what's going on, and it kind of makes sense, right? Given the relationship between her and her father, and really between most girls and their father, that as time progresses, girls become closer to their dads, and then they become closer to their moms. And so in this instance, her father is the only real parental figure she has. It's the only real person she feels like she can go and talk to anything about. And so if there were any person she could have this conversation with, it would be him. But before she gets the chance, she's actually basically tracked down by a cop who, of course, doesn't necessarily shoot her on the spot, but actually tries to. And that's kind of the extent of how she's viewed here. That in some ways, it was pretty dark, right? He tells her like freeze, put her hands up, all that kind of stuff, the things you normally expect to hear when a cop is like, trying to arrest you essentially. And of course, she's dodging and moving out of the way and so on and so forth. But he fires a few shots at her and tries to kill her. And she actually, ends up basically webbing him up so he can't do anything, and then puts in a call saying shots fired, and a bunch of cops show up, and she actually makes her escape, and these cops continue tracking her down. What this does is says, there's basically no safe place for Spider-Gwen. And this is starkly different from the Spider-Man mythos that we're used to. And that was one of the best things about Edge of Spider-Verse, because this is the tip of the iceberg, right? Wait till we get to the story about the Spider-Man who bites Mary Jane Watson. That gets nuts, right? That story gets crazy. It's like a horror story more so than anything else. What you actually also end up getting here is basically Matt Murdock, who's actually a villain, right? Which is kind of crazy, right? It's one of the cool things about this. And so you basically have him talking to Alexi, who is really this alternate realities version of Rhino from Marvel Comics, is really all he is. But as the two of them are talking, basically he's being set upon Captain Stacy, right? Just a desire to take this guy out, because Captain Stacy is not necessarily a bad cop, right? Like, I mean, he's trying to track down Spider-Gwen because in his mind, she's a criminal, a vigilante as far as he's aware. He's doing what he's instructed to do as a member of law enforcement. But more so than that, he takes down big criminals, different things along those lines. So he's as much an issue for Spider-Gwen as he is for like Matt Murdock and any of those guys. And so following this, of course, as you expect, much like if you're familiar with Spider-Man from the main Marvel universe, this girl can't be on time anywhere. That's kind of the thing about Spider-Man, right? Peter Parker, this guy couldn't be on time if he had like a giant purple clock sitting in front of his face telling him what time it was, right? Like, he still couldn't be on time. And so ultimately she's actually late for her own concert with the Mary Janes. Now, there is a little bit of a saving grace here in the sense that like with no drummer there, people are kind of like, I mean, this is a little weird seeing a band with no drummer. But then like Alexi busts in with the intention of going after Captain Stacy, right? Spider-Gwen shows up just at that moment and of course throws on her suit and then immediately goes through to try to save her dad. But it's kind of a little bit of a saving grace, right? Before anybody could realize, hey, this girl's missing, you know, outside of the band. Like this band sucks, right? If it went on for like 15 minutes, people would be like, yeah, this band sucks. They don't have a drummer. This is weird. Let's go next door and get some drinks. That's basically what it would turn into. But you get this thing where Rhino actually gets the upper hand on her. And a lot of this seems to be because she's still fairly new to this, right? She's still fairly new to being a spider character and understanding everything that goes along with it, the various villains that are out there. And even with Peter Parker in the main Marvel universe, it was much the same way. Peter Parker didn't know how to cope with someone like Electro until he fought someone like Electro, right? It's just one of those things. You don't know how to do it until you do. And then you learn how to go forward from there. And so she's able to get the upper hand just by virtue of her enhanced strength and actually overcomes this guy quite readily. I mean, just absolutely pummels this dude and then webs him up, knocks him unconscious and goes to walk away, only to be met by her father, right? For like Captain Stacy to turn around and just be like, you're under arrest. And that's kind of the crazy thing, because you get this really, really cool exchange here, right? It's almost this thing where like she approaches it from a pretty interesting philosophical level, right? He says, don't move an inch. And she's like, really? You know, she's like, what's a girl got to do to impress a guy, right? So obviously maintaining that kind of joking thing, you know, she's like, I just want to be loved, you know, and so on and so forth. And then what happens is things get serious, right? You know, you get that kind of Peter Parker-esque joking, which is sort of necessary for any kind of, you know, alternate reality or any main Marvel Universe Spider-Man story. But when Captain Stacy goes to arrest her, he's like, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Peter Parker. You have the right to remain silent. And that's when she chimes in. She's like, Peter's death, it was not my fault, at least not in the way that you think. But Captain Stacy doesn't care, right? You know, he's like, it's not my job to decide that. And she's like, sure, you'll just leave it to Jameson's angry mob, right? Some crazy guy who ramped up a bunch of crazy people and they all want to take me out. You know, she's like, or you could leave it to the cop that tried to shoot me in a crowded subway. But whatever the case is, and he's like, whatever it takes, right? However long it takes to do it, like, you'll see justice. I will, like, you will stand before a judge for the crime that you committed. And that's when she unmasks, right? She's like, I'm Spider-Gwen. She's like, here's the thing, Dad, like, you're a good cop. You put on the badge because you knew that if you didn't, somebody who doesn't need to wear a badge would, right? Somebody who would abuse their power would do it. And so you are in effect, not necessarily super powered, but you're a person who does the right thing. And that's what I'm doing, right? I'm putting on this mask. I try to do the right thing. Peter Parker got himself killed. He became a villain, right? He became a bad guy. You know, whatever the case was, it unfolded in his situation. She's like, I didn't kill Peter Parker. And if I'm going to be like you, and I'm going to be somebody who stands up for small people, like I'm going to be somebody who makes the world a better place, I can't do it from a jail cell, right? I can't do it there. So you have to let me go, right? She's like, this mask is my badge now, right? If I don't define what it means, monsters like that will. And that's true, right? That's one of those things where if you have a cause that you're standing up for, you have to have a face of that cause. Otherwise, you'll become a kind of walking, talking case study where your opposition defines your cause better than you do. That's why I always advocate every movement has to have a leader. Otherwise, you end up having people who do things awry and there's no one there to say they don't stand for what we believe in. And so that's why she has to be out there and doing this kind of thing, because it's not necessarily about her solidifying what it means means to be a hero. To a degree it is. It's her solidifying the idea that not everyone out there with powers is a bad guy. Some of us are good guys, and some of us are trying to do good things. And so as a result of that, I have to go out and be one of the good people. And her dad lets her go. Right now, the thing about this is all being watched by Spider-Man UK. And his response is, yes, you'll do quite nicely. They're gonna bring her into their ranks. Now, here's a funny thing. This story, it was nuts, right? Like when this came out, everybody wanted to know everything about Spider-Gwen. They were like, no. You can't give us some story in Edge of Spider-Verse like this and give us nothing else again, right? Because she showed back up in the main Spider-Verse event, but she was so huge that Marvel like had to create a story about her, right? I mean, it sold like gangbusters. And so ever since then, Spider-Gwen's been like a mainstay in Marvel Comics. She's just that popular. And she probably always will be, to be honest. I mean, she's always written just incredibly well. But yeah, that's the origin of Spider-Gwen in Marvel Comics. If I'm being honest with you guys, I would not be surprised if this video does terrible. But thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.